In the fading hush of an Ozark hollow, where the last light slides between hickory trunks, folks still whisper about the Boggs money, 40,000 in gold said to have vanished as if the hills themselves swallowed it. What truth lies beneath that silence, and why does the story refuse to die? Some say it waits in the dark earth still. Welcome, friends. Let me know where you are watching from tonight and what memories these hills stir for you. Settle in and consider subscribing to keep our Ozark stories alive. The hills hold their breath at daybreak, and if you stand still long enough, you can feel that quiet settle around you like an old quilt. Out here, the Ozarks rise and fall in long waves, ridges lifting into pale sky, hollows dipping into cool darkness where dew clings to ironweed and the smell of damp stone hangs in the air. Folks often say that stories linger longer than people do, drifting through cedar thickets, slipping under fence rails, waiting to be heard again. And this land, with its stubborn beauty and its deep folded shadows, has always had a way of keeping secrets so tight that even time itself has trouble prying them loose. The tale of the Boggs family and the gold, or what people said was gold, that once passed through their hands, grows out of this landscape like a root from the hillside. To understand how a fortune might vanish without a trace, you first have to understand the place that held it. These ridges were settled by people who worked hard for every scrap they owned, men and women who trusted few and leaned on fewer. They built their cabins close to springs or along narrow bottoms of creek valleys where corn could take hold and the soil gave what it could. Every sound had meaning back then. The crack of a branch carried through a hollow, the distant thud of a woodcutter's axe, even the soft hush of a wagon wheel on packed earth. Life was close to the bone, and when someone spoke a name, it meant more than just a family line. It meant reputation, memory, and the quiet ledger of how folks treated one another. The Boggs name was like that, not whispered with fear or awe, not exactly, but spoken with a sober respect. They were known as people who minded their business and expected others to do the same, a family steady enough to raise good crops and keep their fences straight. Yet there was always a little space around their name. A small pause that suggested something more lay beneath the surface, something older than rumor, but not quite solid enough to call fact. The hills around their homestead were covered in oak and ash, with limestone outcrops jutting like old bones from the soil. On dry summer days, dust rose from the rutted paths as wagons pulled by tired mules creaked along the ridge. In winter, the wind crawled through the hollows and wrapped around the eaves with a low moan. People lived close to nature's edges here, and they noticed things most would overlook. A freshly turned patch of earth, a stranger's boot prints near a spring, the distant echo of voices carried on still air. These details were how the community understood its world. They pieced together stories from what the land showed them. And before long, the Boggs place became one of those landmarks that folks turned to with curiosity, wondering what they might learn if only the stones could speak. Old courthouse ledgers, the kind written in looping script that seems to drift like creek water across the page, mention the Boggs family in small ways. A land purchase here, a tax settlement there, nothing dramatic, nothing that would catch a historian's eye at first glance. But it is interesting to see how frequently their name appears in those early records. Too often to be insignificant, too sparingly to be flashy. They were present always, steady as a fence post in spring mud. In the evenings when neighbors gathered on porches and the cicadas cried out from the treetops, someone might mention the family with a quiet nod, adding just enough detail to keep curiosity alive. Perhaps that is how the early bones of the treasure story took shape, not from a sudden event, but from a slow accumulation of small remarks, each one drifting down like a leaf onto an ever-growing pile. The truth is, the Ozarks were ripe for mystery even before a hint of gold appeared in conversation. This region has a long memory for things that go unspoken. Travelers in the 19th century wrote about the solitude here, how the hills felt both protective and watchful. They spoke of nights where the moonlight fell in strips across the ground and seemed to disappear between the trees. They wrote of hollows so quiet that the snap of a twig sounded like a warning. When a place holds itself apart like that, people begin to imagine what might be hiding in those folds of land. They start to wonder what riches the earth might be keeping safe, or what tragedies might be resting just beneath the roots. As the years rolled by, small hints began to surface that the Boggs family handled money differently than most. Nothing extravagant, nothing boasting. Just little signs that something was being set aside or tucked away. And though no one would have dared confront them directly, such things were private matters after all, neighbors noticed more than they let on. Some said they saw the family working late into the night. Others recalled how the Boggs men were cautious around strangers, watching the roads as if expecting someone. These recollections, though faint and stretched by time, still linger in old local histories and in the murmured stories passed down at family reunions or church suppers. It makes a person wonder, how does a simple Ozark family, quiet and hard-working, become the center of a tale involving tens of thousands of dollars in gold? Did the land itself draw the story toward them, or was it something in their nature that invited such speculation? The hills have always stirred the imagination, and when money, especially gold, enters the picture, folks tend to fill in the blank spaces with their own ideas. But long before talk of treasure, before the gold was said to have vanished, what people remembered most about the Boggs family was their silence. Not coldness, just a deliberate, measured silence, as if they carried burdens too heavy to share or guarded truths not meant for daylight. As the sun sets behind these ridges, shadows stretch out and settle over old barns, over empty fields, over foundations of cabins that crumbled decades ago. The land holds every story it has been given, and some it keeps for itself. The first hints of the Boggs mystery feel like one of those stories tucked in the soil, waiting for patient hands to brush away the dust. And it is in those faint details, those porch whispers, those ledger entries, those glimpses of unusual caution, that we begin to see the outline of something larger, something that will soon grow into one of the most enduring treasure legends in Ozark memory. Some evenings, when the wind shifts just right, you might swear you hear footsteps on gravel near the old Boggs place, though no one has walked that path in years. It is a soft sound, almost hesitant, carrying the weight of a story that has only begun to unfold. The sound of those imagined footsteps on gravel lingers in the mind like a half-remembered warning, and it leads us quietly toward the world the Boggs family once moved through, a world where every footfall mattered and where the earth itself seemed to keep watch over the lives of the people who depended on it. When we follow that sound back in time, letting it guide us down the slope toward the old homestead, we find ourselves stepping into the rhythm of frontier life as the Boggs family knew it. Their days were measured not by clocks, but by seasons, by the rise and fall of creek water, by the tasks that waited with the same patience as the land. They were farmers, woodsmen, traders when circumstances required, and every member of the family had a place in the long, unbroken chain of work that held a household together. Out here, the difference between stability and ruin was often just a few failed crops or an unexpected illness, and a family's reputation meant more than any piece of paper filed in a courthouse. Neighbors remembered the Boggs family not only for their hard work, but for a kind of inwardness that set them apart. They were not unfriendly, nor were they the type to stir trouble. They simply lived with a guardedness that some found admirable and others found mysterious. Their fences were kept in good order, their livestock well cared for, and their dealings in town were quiet and straightforward. In a community like this, where everyone's life touched everyone else's, even slightly peculiar habits could take on oversized meaning. And though most folks respected the family's privacy, there was a sense that the Boggs household held itself just a little apart, as if something deeper than simple self-reliance guided the way they lived and moved through their days. Some said it was pride. Others said it was caution born from older family burdens. Still others claimed the Boggs family simply knew more about the world and its dangers than they chose to speak aloud. Those dangers were real enough in the years before the treasure legend took shape. The Ozarks had long been a crossroads where law-abiding farmers rubbed shoulders with drifters, deserters, and the occasional outlaw seeking a place where authorities seldom tread. In the decades after the war, bands of displaced men drifted from ridge to ridge, some harmless, others unpredictable. Money was scarce, and when people had it, they kept it close, for banks were few and trust was as thin as the morning mist that hovered over the hollows. It was common for families to hide valuables in their homes, bury coins near fence posts, or stash earnings in odd corners of barns where they hoped no thief would think to look. The Boggs family, with their quiet ways and their habit of keeping to themselves, fit naturally into this world of necessity and precaution. Still, when old-timers describe them in later years, they often mention the sense that the Boggs family seemed more prepared than most for trouble. The way they watched the road from the porch, the way they took note of travelers passing through, the way they kept tools sharpened and animals penned tight at night. That kind of vigilance did not arise from imagination alone. It came from living in a time when a single misstep could bring ruin. Perhaps this is why, when the story of hidden money began to grow roots, people believed the Boggs family capable of such secrecy. They had already shown they could guard their daily lives with a level of care others found unusual. What records remain from their era paint a modest picture. The Boggs family owned enough land to survive, but not enough to be considered wealthy. Their fields produced corn and beans, their orchard offered apples in good years, and they likely raised hogs that foraged in the woods until slaughter time. They traded when necessary and weathered lean seasons with the same endurance that defined so many Ozark families. And yet, tucked among these simple facts were hints, subtle, scattered, and easily overlooked, that the family may have handled more money than others suspected. A few entries in the county ledger show larger than average purchases for livestock. A neighbor speaking decades later recalled seeing a Boggs man carrying a lockbox to the smokehouse one evening. Another claimed the family owned a strongbox with a brass latch, though no one could say where it came from or what it held. Stories like these are fragile. They can shift with memory, bend with time, or grow in the telling. But they are also the seeds from which larger tales take root. And in the Ozarks, where the land itself seems to breathe stories into the air, even small seeds can grow into something enduring. As neighbors watch the Boggs family move through their days with that quiet vigilance, people began to form their own ideas about what the family might be guarding. The truth remains unclear, and perhaps it always will. But the feeling of something kept close, something carefully tended, began to cling to the Boggs name. Life on the frontier demanded cooperation, yet privacy was fiercely valued. Families helped one another during harvests or when sickness struck, but they did not pry into personal affairs. If a man said he had his reasons for doing something, that was often enough. And so, when small peculiarities emerged around the Boggs homestead, an unusual purchase in town, a visit from a relative whose purpose went unexplained, a length of time during which the family seemed unusually wary, people noticed but rarely questioned the details openly. Instead, they stored those observations like tools on a shelf, ready to be taken down years later, when the rumors of missing gold began to swirl through the valleys and hollows. That gold, if it ever existed, would later be said to have passed through the hands of the Boggs family during a time when great fortunes were moving quietly and without record. The years after the war saw many men traveling with money earned through trade, reward, or less honest means. Gold coins circulated alongside paper currency and privately minted tokens, and because banks were scarce, people often stored their earnings at home. The Boggs family may have found themselves in possession of such wealth, whether through inheritance, hard work, or chance encounter. But if they did, they told no one. And that silence, that studied carefulness, became the foundation upon which the legend began to build. It is worth wondering about their inner life. The conversations held behind closed doors, the decisions weighed during long winter evenings when the wind clawed at the corners of the house. Did they fear losing what they had? Did they trust the world enough to reveal their circumstances, or did they believe the hills alone could keep them safe? When a family lives so close to danger for so long, secrecy can become a kind of armor, worn out of habit as much as necessity. And once that armor forms, it can be difficult to remove, even in times of peace. As we picture that homestead now, long gone but not forgotten, the air seems heavy with the memory of those unspoken concerns. You can almost hear the low murmur of nighttime voices through a closed cabin door, the crackle of firelight flickering over thoughtful expressions, the slow pacing of a man who weighs his options carefully before choosing a path that will shape the years to come. The Boggs family lived within that world of private choices, and the legacy of their caution would soon ignite the imaginations of those around them. Tonight, if you listen closely near the old property line, where the foundation stones still rest beneath layers of moss, you might catch that quiet sound again, a hesitation in the gravel, a step taken in the half-dark, as if someone long gone still walks the path, guarding something the hills have not yet chosen to give up. There is a moment just after twilight settles over an Ozark ridge when the world seems to hold its breath. The path near the old Boggs place feels especially still at that hour, as if the land itself is listening for something, some confession the earth never gave. Those soft, lingering footsteps fade into the hush of evening, and with that fading comes a shadow that once weighed heavily over the lives of everyone in those hills, a growing tension that crept into the Ozarks like a cold draft under a cabin door. The years surrounding the Boggs story were shaped not only by the daily circumstances of frontier life, but by a restless unease that colored everything people did. And when you follow that unease back through the memories of old families and the pages of yellowed newspapers, you begin to understand why the Boggs family grew cautious, why their silence deepened, and why the idea of hidden gold would later seem far more plausible than anyone would admit in broad daylight. The Ozarks after the war were not quiet in the way we think of quiet now. Yes, the land held its long silences, and the woods swallowed sound with a patience that unsettled newcomers. But beneath that natural stillness ran a low current of human worry. Bands of men drifted across the hills, some returning home, some fleeing old debts, some living by no law but their own survival. There were stories of bushwhackers hiding along creek banks, of deserters moving by night, and of small groups of armed men whose intentions were never fully clear. Old newspapers, their ink faded but still legible, speak of isolated thefts, of saddlebags cut open while a rider slept, of cabins visited by strangers who left too many questions behind. The Ozarks were wide, the law thin, and fear traveled as easily as the morning fog. It was during these unsettled years that the Boggs family began to draw more attention than usual, not because they sought it, far from it, but because their caution grew more visible. Neighbors recalled how the men of the family rarely traveled unarmed and never walked the road alone after sundown. They locked their smokehouse even when nothing of great value sat inside. They kept their horses close to the cabin, tied in ways that suggested they expected a quick departure. These small details, innocuous on their own, began to add weight to the stories surrounding them. People noticed because in times of danger, everyone watched everyone else just a little more closely, if only to better judge which homes were safe and which might invite trouble. When families gathered in their kitchens on long winter nights, they spoke in low tones about the dangers on the ridges. voices that trembled slightly when the wind rattled loose shingles or a stray dog barked in the distance. They told stories of traders robbed along the road, of men who disappeared for days, of sudden bursts of violence in places otherwise calm. And when the Boggs name came up in those conversations, it was often accompanied by a simple statement: they were careful. That word, careful, carried a heavy meaning in those years. It meant vigilant, guarded, perhaps even fearful of something not seen but felt. Some neighbors believed the family had reason for such vigilance. Rumors drifted through the hollows that at least one member of the Boggs family had crossed paths with dangerous men during the war years. Others said they had seen a group of riders stop near the Boggs property before disappearing into the woods, their intentions unknown but their presence unsettling. Such stories grew with the retelling, shaped by memory and fear alike, until people began to wonder whether the Boggs family was being watched, or whether they were watching for someone who had not yet arrived. But fear has a way of reshaping truth. In the Ozarks, where every ridge hides 100 secrets and every hollow deepens the imagination, people sometimes interpreted ordinary behavior as evidence of hidden danger. A man checking his livestock at night might simply be cautious, or he might be guarding something no one else knew existed. A woman walking the perimeter of her yard might be looking for stray animals, or she might be scanning for intruders. In such a world, it became easy to see shadows where none existed. Yet with the Boggs family, the shadows seemed to gather naturally around them, clinging to their name with an almost stubborn insistence. Old newspaper records, sparse but evocative, speak to the atmosphere of the time. Articles describe travelers robbed between distant towns, stage routes disrupted, and locals urged to keep valuables hidden. The value of gold rose and fell like a fever. Those who possessed it learned quickly that silence was the first line of defense. It is said that some men buried their earnings in old iron kettles, others hid them in hollow tree trunks, while a few trusted no hiding place and kept their money in horse saddles or heavy belts where it could be guarded by hand. In this environment, a family like the Boggs, quiet, steady, and cautious, began to seem less mysterious and more simply practical. Yet the seed of suspicion had already been planted. Tensions rose not just from danger, but from desperation. Poor harvests pushed some families to the brink. Drought left wells low. A harsh winter destroyed crops and scattered livestock. People grew wary of one another, and when a family appeared to be doing better than expected, or behaving more cautiously than seemed reasonable, neighbors took note. The Boggs family, with their habit of keeping important matters to themselves, naturally absorbed that scrutiny. They did not invite questions, and that only made the questions grow. Some recalled seeing the Boggs men walking the ridgeline at dusk, scanning the horizon with the patience of hunters. Others noticed the way the family handled their tools, how a spade might be cleaned with unusual care, how a pickaxe might be sharpened long after the day's work was done. None of these actions were incriminating, but in the tense world of the Ozarks at that time, they became small points of curiosity. Over months and years, those points connected themselves into lines, and those lines began to form the vague outline of a story the community could not stop telling. Even children sensed the tension. They whispered among themselves about the road near the Boggs place, saying that night moved strangely there, that sounds carried differently. A few claimed they had heard muffled voices when no one stood in the yard, or seen a figure slip behind an oak tree only to vanish when approached. These were the imaginings of youth, perhaps, shaped by the unease of their elders. But such tales, even when the product of fear and fancy, lodge themselves deep in the culture of a place. They linger, waiting for the right moment to rise again, waiting for some spark that turns scattered stories into a legend. By the time the first whispers of hidden gold surfaced, the environment was primed for it. Tension had laid the groundwork, planting suspicion where none had existed. The Boggs family's caution, their quiet routines, and the uncertain dangers surrounding them all combined into a single narrative thread, ready to be tugged into a larger tapestry of mystery. And once the idea of treasure entered the conversation, it wove itself so naturally into the community's memories that people struggled to recall the years before the story began. Tonight, if you walk the ridge where the Boggs homestead once stood, the air still feels charged, as though something long unresolved drifts through the trees. And as the wind moves across the hillside with a low, restless sigh, you may sense what the Boggs family once felt lingering all around them: the press of danger, the weight of silence, and the faint glow of a lantern being blown out in the dark. When that lantern flame gutters and dies, the darkness that follows feels heavier than night ought to be, as though the air itself is holding its breath. In that quiet space, where only the faint glow of the moon outlines the shape of the ridge, we begin to sense the moment when the Boggs story shifted from ordinary caution to something far more unusual. A blown-out lantern leaves a family blind for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, decisions must be made. Swift, careful, and irreversible. And it is out of this darkened moment, this small extinguishing of light, that the next chapter of the Boggs tale rises. The sudden appearance, withdrawal, or concealment of money far beyond what anyone expected a modest Ozark family to possess. The old records offer only hints, but the hints are enough to suggest that something large was set in motion, something that would ripple through the hills for generations. Morning after morning, the Boggs men were seen heading down the narrow path toward town, their expressions unreadable, their horses moving with the tired steadiness of animals accustomed to long rides and longer worries. They carried little with them on the journey, yet returned with their saddlebags heavy and their pace measured, as though weighing not only the burden of the trail, but the weight of whatever lay tucked away inside those bags. Some said they were handling money on behalf of others, perhaps entrusted with gold from travelers seeking safe shelter. Others whispered they had come into an inheritance from distant kin, though no one could name the relatives or the place they lived. The truth of their dealings remains obscured beneath the worn language of ledgers and the fading recollections of neighbors who saw only what the Boggs family allowed them to see. The courthouse records, brittle with age and speckled with ink spots that resemble dried raindrops, reveal that at least one deposit of unusual size was made around this time. Not a fortune, not yet, but a sum larger than any previous entry attached to the Boggs name. Then, some weeks later, the ledgers show a sudden withdrawal, a dramatic one, the kind that would have caused murmurs in the tiny clerk's office. The exact amount varies in retellings, but the impression is consistent. Money moved quickly through the hands of the Boggs family, appearing suddenly and disappearing just as fast, as though the coins barely had time to gleam in the daylight before being tucked away again. Neighbors noticed changes in behavior that at the time felt small but later gained outsized significance. The Boggs men built a new chest, oak boards, iron hinges, a lock with a curious weight to it. And though such chests were common in frontier homes, few families crafted them with such care. A neighbor helping with a fence repair recalled hearing the sound of metal inside the chest, a heavy clink that did not quite match the sound of horseshoes or tools. Another neighbor said he saw the Boggs boys digging behind the barn at dusk, their shovels striking the earth with quiet intent, though when he passed by again the next day, the ground looked undisturbed, smoothed over as though no digging had happened at all. These were small things, odd only in hindsight, but they set tongues wagging all the same. It was during this period that the Boggs family's caution began to change shape. No longer was it simple watchfulness, no longer the carefulness of people guarding against the ever-present dangers of the post-war hills. Instead, their vigilance took on a new sharpness, a stillness that seemed to settle over their home like a gathering storm. Their eyes tracked movement on the road with a deeper intensity. Their conversations grew quieter still, their voices lowering even when alone in the yard, as if the trees themselves might overhear what they wished to keep hidden. Some said the family received visitors who did not stay long, strangers whose names were never spoken, men who arrived on horseback, exchanged a few tense words near the well, and then vanished down the ridge without glancing back. Others said the family had begun carrying small pouches strapped beneath their clothing, the kind used by men who feared robbery and trusted no saddlebag or lockbox to protect them. Whether these stories hold truth or whether time has stretched them into something larger than fact, no one living can say. But what is certain is that the Boggs family was handling more money than they ever admitted, and they guarded that money with a commitment that bordered on desperation. It is tempting now to imagine gold, round, heavy coins stamped with the worn features of distant presidents, being counted in the dim light of the Boggs cabin. But imagination is a wild thing, eager to make fact fit the shape of legend. We have no proof that gold passed through their hands. Some accounts insist it was paper money, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from damp air. Others claim it was a mixture, bits of gold, bits of silver, some currency, perhaps even government bonds. All we know for certain is that something valuable was entrusted to that family or found by them, and that they took immediate steps to hide it. The withdrawal recorded in the courthouse ledger was followed, not long after, by a period during which the family rarely ventured far from home. Their fields went half-tended, their usual visits to town grew infrequent, and when they were seen along the ridge, the Boggs men looked over their shoulders as though measuring the distance between themselves and some invisible threat. Such behavior only fed the growing rumors. Children overheard their parents whispering at night, and those whispers became the foundation for stories told beneath schoolyard trees. Some said the Boggs family had angered the wrong men. Others believed they had stumbled onto something not meant for them. Still others insisted the family was preparing to leave the area entirely, though the cabin remained occupied and the fields never fully abandoned. In the evenings, as sunlight thinned behind the ridges, neighbors sometimes heard the faint sound of metal striking rock. Not the sharp ring of a blacksmith's hammer, but a muted tapping, deliberate and cautious. They could not see what the family was doing, but they imagined digging into the hillside perhaps, or burying something away from the prying eyes of travelers. The Boggs place sat close to a narrow ravine lined with limestone, and the sound echoed strangely in that natural channel, making it impossible to tell how far away the noise originated or what precisely caused it. One woman, long since passed, told her grandchildren that she saw a lantern moving across the Boggs property late one night. The flame bobbed and dipped as though carried by someone in a hurry, weaving between trees before disappearing behind a stand of cedar. A moment after it vanished, she heard a dull thud, like a shovel meeting stubborn soil. When she told her husband, he warned her to say nothing. "Not our business," he said. "Some things best stay buried." But the land remembers. Even now, decades later, when rain falls hard and fast, the hillside near the Boggs place reveals strange patches where the earth settles differently, where the ground seems to dip or shift in ways that hint at old disturbance. And when people notice these changes, their thoughts drift inevitably toward that old question. What was being moved around that night? What weight was transferred from saddlebag to strongbox, from strongbox to ground? Why did the family grow so quiet, so guarded, so determined to keep whatever passed through their hands hidden from the world? The answers remain beyond our reach, lost to time, to silence, and to the stubborn earth that hides more than it reveals. Yet the trail the Boggs family left behind, faint and incomplete, leads us now to the moment when everything began to fray, when the family's wary routine broke under the pressure of fear, and when the story that would haunt the Ozarks for generations took its darkest turn. For on the far edge of their land, along a narrow trail that dips into shadows and rises into light, the earth holds the memory of a day when the footsteps that once paced the ridge fell silent, leaving behind only a trail that seemed to go quiet all at once, as though a life or a fortune had vanished into the hollow itself. When a trail falls quiet in the Ozarks, truly quiet, it carries a meaning heavier than silence itself. The woods do not simply stop speaking without reason. A squirrel halts mid-chatter. A hawk keeps its cry to itself. Even the wind seems to draw back, as if waiting for some truth to settle. That is the kind of quiet the Boggs family stepped into during the days that followed the strange movements of money, the late-night lanterns, and the guarded looks exchanged across their yard. Something happened on that land, something sudden, something decisive. And though the details remain hidden beneath layers of time and caution, the echoes left behind in memory suggest that the story's darkest turn arrived without warning. A disappearance, a death, or an act that no one nearby would ever forget. This is the shadow that settled over the Boggs homestead and has never fully lifted. Some say it began on a morning colder than it should have been for that season, with a frost that clung to fence posts like a thin veil. The Boggs men were up before dawn, moving about the yard in a hurried silence. A neighbor walking his own property saw one of them leading a horse toward the ridge, its hooves muffled by the damp ground, its breath puffing in pale clouds. Nothing seemed amiss at first. Farm life often demanded early risers. But the neighbor later said the man carried something heavy slung across the saddle. He could not say whether it was a bag, a bundle, or a body, and he admitted he never told anyone at the time. Folks kept their secrets close in those days. But that image stayed with him long after the Boggs family faded from the hollow. The next day, the road near the Boggs place felt different, as though an unseen weight rested upon it. Some neighbors felt it while gathering water from the spring, others while walking past the gate on their way to town. The air held a stillness that made people hesitate before speaking, and when they finally exchanged words, their voices sank into low tones. Something had happened up there, they agreed. Something the family would not speak about. A few men claimed they saw smoke rising from the Boggs property in the early hours, not from the cabin chimney but from the far edge of the clearing, where an old burn pile sometimes smoldered. Yet the smoke that morning drifted strangely, thin, hesitant, unwilling to rise. It carried no scent of brush or timber. When asked later, none of the neighbors could say exactly what it smelled like, only that it was wrong. Wrong in a way they could not explain. And then came the missing face. One of the Boggs men, a son or brother depending on whose version you hear, stopped appearing in the usual places. Not at the well, not in the fields, not at the barn door checking the latch before dusk. Days passed and his absence grew impossible to ignore. When asked about it, the family gave short answers, none of them the same. "He's working away for a spell," one said. "He's gone to tend business," said another. But their eyes would drift elsewhere when speaking, as if the truth lay somewhere behind them, buried in the trees or under the soil. Some believe the missing man died, by accident, by violence, or by the hand of someone he trusted. The Ozarks held more than their share of tragedies in those years: hunting accidents, falls from bluffs, sudden sickness, and the occasional confrontation that escalated too quickly for reason to intervene. Death was not rare, but the lack of any burial, any marker, any funeral gathering was what troubled the community most. In those hills, even the poorest families held wakes for their dead. Even strangers received a modest grave. That this man simply vanished, leaving behind no ceremony, stirred rumors that refused to be silenced. Others claimed the disappearance had nothing to do with death, but everything to do with the money. Some said the missing Boggs son had taken the treasure for himself and fled into the hills, planning to return only when it was safe. These stories tell of a brief encounter along a creek where a traveler supposedly met a man matching the Boggs son's description, mud-splattered, exhausted, and clutching a small, heavy satchel that he refused to set down. But the stranger who shared this account could never be traced, and the details changed with each retelling, leaving only the faint outline of a tale shaped by hope or suspicion. Still others insisted the missing man had been taken from the home, from the ridge, from this world entirely, by people who wanted what he carried. These versions speak of distant hoofbeats in the night, of sharp voices cutting across the dark, of a scuffle near the edge of the ravine. A neighbor woman swore she heard a cry carried on the wind, high and strained, the kind that makes your blood run cold. Her husband dismissed it as a fox's call, but she claimed it was no animal she heard and repeated the story until the day she died. She would say, "It was a man in trouble. I know the sound of fear." Whether her memory held truth or imagination, that cry became part of the Boggs legend, woven so tightly into it that the story cannot be told without someone remembering her words. A few bold souls, men with more curiosity than caution, walked the ridge in the days that followed, hoping to find some sign of what had happened. They found nothing at first. No tracks, no disturbed earth, no scraps of clothing or signs of struggle. But then, one of them noticed something odd near the ravine, a patch of soil that looked recently turned, smoothed over, but still too soft for the season. When he pressed his boot into it, the ground gave more than expected. He said nothing to the others, but returned home with unease coiling tight in his stomach. Years later, long after the Boggs family had left the area, he told his grandson that the earth in that spot felt like it was hiding something. When pressed for more details, he would only shake his head and say, "Some things the hills decide not to share." The absence of the missing Boggs son cast a long shadow over the family. Their routines faltered. Their fields grew wild at the edges. Their porch, once neatly swept, gathered leaves and dust. When they ventured into town, they walked quickly, spoke little, and avoided the eyes of those who wished to question them. Whatever burden they carried, it was clear they carried it as a single unit, bound together by fear or guilt or sorrow, no one could tell which. And then, as if to silence further inquiries, the Boggs family stopped appearing in town altogether. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. Their cabin door rarely opened. Smoke rose from the chimney only sporadically. At night, the property looked dark, as if emptied of life. But occasionally, a faint sound echoed from the barn. Hammering, slow, steady, and strangely distant. Not the lively hammering of construction, but something more tentative, as though done by hands uncertain of their task. A neighbor who passed by at dusk heard it clearly. 3 strikes, a pause, then another. The sound traveled down the ridge and into the hollow, carrying with it an unspoken warning. Whatever happened up there was not finished. Today, when people speak of the Boggs treasure, they often forget this part: the disappearance, the strange quiet, the questions no one ever answered. They remember the gold, the digging, the legends. But beneath all of that lies this darker thread, the one that begins with a lantern being blown out and ends with a life, or perhaps more than one, lost to the silent depths of the Ozark hills. And though we cannot say for sure what happened on that land, the story now leads us deeper into shadow, toward the whispers that began to spread when the neighbors finally admitted what they feared, that something had been hidden and something had been taken, and that buried in the earth near the Boggs place was not only money, but truth waiting beneath the stubborn soil. Some nights, if you stand near that ravine, you might feel a faint tremor underfoot. Not a sound, not a movement, but a sense, as if the ground itself remembers what it once held. And in that moment, you might wonder what lies just beneath those stones. Down in the hollow where shadows pool beneath the cedars and the air hangs with the scent of damp leaves, you can almost believe the ground keeps its own counsel. There's a stillness there that feels older than the families who farm these slopes, older than the cabins that once dotted the ridges, older even than the roads carved by hooves and wagon wheels. The stones sit heavy, patient, holding secrets the hills have layered over them. And it was into this expectant quiet that the first rumors of hidden gold began to spread, drifting from porch to porch, whispered over fences, shared in murmured tones at the general store. People did not speak of treasure lightly in those days. The Ozarks were practical, lean, and rooted in hard work. Yet something about the Boggs' disappearance, about that softened earth, that strange smoke, that unclaimed silence, stirred the imagination. Before long, the idea of buried money no longer felt outlandish. It felt possible. The earliest whispers likely began with neighbors trying to make sense of the sudden absence of one of the Boggs men. Folks reasoned that no man disappears for no cause. Something must have driven him from the hollow or pulled him beneath it. And because human minds lean towards stories that explain what fear cannot, people began to ask themselves why the Boggs family had grown so guarded in the weeks before the disappearance. They remembered the nighttime visitors, the sharp glances exchanged across the yard, the hurried repairs around the homestead. They remembered the sounds of digging, faint but undeniable, drifting across the ravine like muted hammer blows. None of this was enough to claim certainty, but it was more than enough to spark curiosity. One neighbor who lived near the ridge said that soon after the disappearance, he noticed fresh tracks, small depressions in the earth, shaped by the careful steps of someone who did not want to be heard. The tracks led toward a cluster of oaks behind the Boggs barn. When he followed them the next morning, he found nothing out of place except a peculiar patch of soil that seemed too loose for the season. He pressed his boot into it and felt the earth shift beneath him, soft and hollow, as though something below had been disturbed. When he told his wife, she urged him not to return, warning him that some matters were heavier than curiosity could bear. But he never forgot that hollow feeling beneath his feet, and when the first rumors of buried gold began to swirl, he said quietly, "It could be something down there." Another piece of fuel came from an elderly woman who had lived on the ridge since childhood. She remembered a night when she saw the faint glimmer of a lantern weaving through the cedars. It moved low toward the ravine, and the person carrying it walked with a deliberate, cautious gait. She claimed she heard the scraping of a shovel, gentle, controlled, as though someone did not want to be noticed even by the trees. She never saw who held the lantern, and the next morning nothing appeared unusual, but the sound stayed with her. And in her final years, she would tell her grandchildren, "I heard someone hiding something. I know the difference between burying and digging." That distinction between burying something you wish to retrieve and burying something you hope no one ever finds took hold in people's minds. Before long, the whispers had shape, edges, and weight. People began to speculate not about whether treasure existed, but about the nature of it. Some insisted the Boggs family had inherited gold from a distant relative who served in the war. Others believed they had been entrusted with money from travelers who feared robbery on the road. Then there were the darker versions, that the Boggs family had come into possession of money not freely given, perhaps taken from someone who would come looking for it. These stories hinted at danger, at men with guns moving through the woods, at whispered threats delivered in the dead of night. The Ozarks had seen such things before. People knew the cost of crossing the wrong men. The strongest rumor emerged from a conversation overheard outside a general store, where two older men were discussing the disappearance in hushed tones. One of them said he'd heard that $40,000 in gold, an amount so enormous most farmers could not imagine it, was hidden somewhere on the Boggs land. He spoke the number as though it were too large to fit inside a cabin, too heavy to lift without straining the back. The listener, startled, asked how such a story could be true. The answer, as always, was vague. "That's what I've been told, and there's reasons the family went quiet." Whether this exchange happened as recalled or whether it grew in the telling, no one can say. But that number, 40,000, stuck. It clung to the story like moss to a stone, and once spoken aloud, it became impossible to remove. By the time the tale took firm root, every odd detail from the Boggs property became a clue. A section of collapsed fence might suggest someone had dragged something heavy across it. A patch of earth that grew grass more slowly than its surroundings could hint at buried metal. Even the presence of an unusual stone, angular, out of place, was interpreted as something set deliberately to cover a hidden chamber. And though no one dared trespass openly, children often crept toward the Boggs place after school, peering through pines to catch a glimpse of anything unusual. They returned home with breathless stories of hearing faint clinks or seeing figures move through the trees. Their parents dismissed it as imagination, yet secretly wondered if the children had glimpsed truths adults feared to name. Fear and fascination grew together. The Boggs family, still mourning or hiding or both, retreated further from community life. They answered few questions, shared little in conversation, and kept their gaze lowered when passing through town. Their silence seemed to confirm the whispers. People reasoned that if the family had nothing hidden, they would say so, but their refusal to speak, whether rooted in grief, shame, or guilt, allowed the tale of the treasure to flourish unchecked. Soon, rumors expanded to describe how the supposed gold was buried. Some claimed it was divided into smaller caches, each sealed in iron pots and hidden near the limestone ravine. Others insisted it lay in a single chest reinforced with iron straps, buried deep enough that the sound of a shovel hitting its lid could scarcely be heard. These variations reveal something important. The community was trying to make sense of a story without facts. They were constructing explanations to fill in the empty spaces left by the Boggs family's silence. By the time a few bolder individuals decided to search the land, quietly, at night, without permission, the legend was already firmly rooted. These early treasure hunters left few written records, but their descendants recalled stories of men slipping through the woods with lanterns hooded by cloth, digging shallow pits in the moonlight, listening for the hollow echo of a box beneath the soil. Nothing was found, but each fruitless search only deepened the mystery. If the gold had existed, someone reasoned, the Boggs family must have moved it again, hidden it deeper, placed it beyond reach. And if it had not existed, then why had the family's behavior changed so dramatically? Why the sudden disappearance? Why the silence? In the Ozarks, silence is often taken as a kind of admission, but it can also be a shield, one raised against sorrow or guilt, or a truth too dangerous to speak. As the treasure rumor grew, the Boggs family remained silent, and that silence became the backbone of the legend. People began to believe the treasure was not just hidden, but protected by secrecy, by memory, perhaps even by something darker. On some nights, those who lived near the Boggs place claimed they heard a slow, rhythmic sound drifting across the ravine. Not the digging of men this time, but something quieter, more final, the hesitant, almost reluctant hammering of wood being nailed shut. The sound echoed faintly, rolling down the hollow like a warning. Whatever the Boggs family had hidden, the hills seemed to say it would not be uncovered easily, and so the first stirrings of the treasure legend grew into a restless murmur that filled the hollows. The whispers gathered weight. Suspicion became story, story became memory, and memory settled under the stones like something half-buried, waiting for the next curious soul to come searching. If you stand near that ravine today, where the cedars cast their long shadows and the ground still dips in odd places, you might feel it, that subtle hum of something concealed. And you might ask yourself the same question people have asked for more than a century. What exactly lies beneath those stones? Those stones, so ordinary at first glance, became a kind of quiet invitation, one that the hills never spoke aloud, yet one that certain men could not ignore. Curiosity in the Ozarks has always been a slow-burning ember, steady and patient, But once it catches, it flares into something bright enough to draw people across ridges in the dead of night. And when the whispers of the Boggs treasure reached men whose lives had been shaped by hard times, whose hands were calloused by years of work, and whose dreams stretched just a little beyond the reach of their pockets, the temptation to search became too strong to resist. These were the first treasure hunters, not the modern hobbyists with metal detectors and maps, but the farmers, drifters, and occasional fortune seekers who lived close enough to hear the rumors as they were born. Their steps were hesitant, their motives mixed, part hope, part need, part the irresistible pull of a mystery buried in their own backyard. Their efforts began quietly, as most things in the Ozarks do. A man might pause near the Boggs fence line on his way back from checking his cattle, gazing toward the ravine as though expecting the earth to reveal its secrets. Another might wander the ridge under the guise of hunting squirrels or gathering firewood, all the while letting his eyes linger on patches of soil that seemed too smooth, too uniform, too deliberately arranged. The first true searches happened at night, beneath a moon just bright enough to guide a careful hand, but dim enough to keep unwanted attention away. The treasure hunters moved in pairs or alone, carrying shovels wrapped in burlap to keep them from clanging. They carried their lanterns low, using a coat or hat to shield the glow. The woods absorbed their motions, the earth swallowing the soft scrape of metal against soil. One of the earliest attempts came from two young men, cousins, barely into adulthood, who had grown up hearing pieces of the Boggs story long before it became fully formed. They waited for a night when the wind rose strong enough to mask their movements. Slipping through the trees, they crept toward the edge of the ravine where the ground dipped unevenly. They dug shallow pits first, testing the soil, listening for any hollow ring that might signal the presence of a buried box. They whispered to one another about what might be below them, a fortune, a curse, a body, a secret the Boggs family had been too frightened to speak aloud. But after hours of work, their shovels hit only rock and roots. Exhausted and chilled by the night air, they abandoned the attempt before dawn and returned to their homes with empty hands and the knowledge that treasure hunting carries its own quiet shame. Not all who searched were young. Some were seasoned men, steady in mind and cautious in nature. One such man, known for his level-headedness, spent several evenings walking the property line, his lantern shuttered so tightly, a person standing 2 feet away would hardly see it flicker. He was convinced the treasure existed, not because he believed in folklore, but because he trusted his instincts. He had seen the change in the Boggs family with his own eyes. He had heard the strange nighttime hammering, felt the odd settling of the ground beneath his boots, sensed the unease that clung to the homestead like fog on a cold morning. And yet, even he found nothing. He later said the land felt disturbed but unwilling, as though something had altered its shape, but time had softened every sign into ambiguity. What gave the legend even more strength were the stories that drifted out of town newspapers, not front-page headlines, but small notes tucked in the corners of early editions. These reports mention men arrested for trespassing, strangers seen loitering near old properties, rumors of valuables hidden during uncertain times. In one clipping, difficult to decipher now due to age and fading ink, a line reads, "Local residents report late-night activity near the former Boggs homestead, though no evidence of theft or property damage was found." The article is brief, almost dismissive, but it hints at the undercurrent already running through the community. People were looking for something. People were convinced something was there. General stores served as the true hub of speculation. Around the potbelly stove, with its iron belly glowing red during the winter months, men traded theories like cards at a quiet table. One claimed he had seen a Boggs boy carrying a chest so heavy it took 2 men to lift it. Another insisted he had heard from his brother-in-law's cousin that the gold was originally tied to a payroll shipment never delivered to its destination. A third man, a habitual storyteller, told anyone who would listen that the treasure had been divided into 3 piles, each marked by a carved stone whose meaning was known only to the Boggs patriarch. The details often contradicted one another, but that never mattered. The goal wasn't truth. It was the thrill of proximity to a mystery. The treasure hunters continued their efforts through the years, each stirring the curiosity of the next. They learned to interpret certain signs. A sunken depression might suggest a collapsed hiding place. An unusually straight tree root could signal earth that had been disturbed, and an old nail or hinge found in the soil might point to a container buried long ago. Even harmless objects became clues: a shard of pottery, an old buckle, a worn horseshoe. People leaned in close to inspect them, willing them to be evidence of something more. One story tells of a hunter who struck something solid beneath the earth, a hollow thud that sent a chill straight down his spine. He dug frantically, convinced he had found the chest itself, but when he reached the source, he uncovered only an old cedar stump. Its center rotted away, creating the very hollow sound he had mistaken for buried riches. He sat back on the ground, exhausted and embarrassed, but that moment, when the shovel met hollow wood, haunted him. He would later say, "For a heartbeat, I thought I held the future in my hands." These failures did nothing to dispel the legend. In fact, they strengthened it. Every empty hole suggested the treasure was simply elsewhere. Every fruitless night meant someone else might one day be luckier. And each near miss, each hollow thud, each soft patch of earth, each rumor overheard, wove the story deeper into Ozark memory. But the treasure hunters were not the only ones shaping the legend. Families living near the Boggs land began to see signs in the natural world that fed the tale: a section of ground that refused to grow grass, a patch of earth that stayed warm long after the surrounding soil cooled. Places where the snow melted first in early winter, leaving bare patches that looked suspiciously like disturbed ground. These small oddities, natural phenomena most likely, were given meaning by people who were searching for meaning. As the years rolled forward and the Boggs property changed hands, each new owner inherited the same curious eyes, the same quiet visits from hopeful searchers, the same questions that could never be met with firm answers. Some owners chased off trespassers. Others allowed small searches, hoping someone might strike luck and prove the legend true. But nothing was ever found. Nothing definitive. Nothing that could silence the questions or end the whispers. What these early treasure hunters left behind was not an excavation, but an expectation. A belief that the truth lay somewhere underfoot, just beyond the reach of the shovel, waiting for the right moment or the right person to uncover it. And it was from their efforts, their nighttime digging, their fearful glances over their shoulders, that the legend absorbed its next layer, one that made it harder to dismiss and easier to believe. Late at night, when their shovels struck something hollow, even if only a root or a stump, that sound carried into the cultural memory of the Ozarks. It became part of the rhythm of the story, an echo, faint but unmistakable, of something lying beneath the soil, something waiting. And though most of those first searchers have long since passed on, the image of their lanterns bobbing through the cedars remains. You can almost see them now, moving quietly, hopeful and fearful, their shovels poised above the earth, asking the same question the hills have asked for generations. Is something truly buried here? Or do we only hear what we wish to hear when the night grows still? When that hollow echo fades into the cold air of the ridge, it leaves behind an uneasiness that settles between the trees like an unwelcome guest. The treasure hunters, bold or desperate or simply curious, stirred something in the land, but they also stirred something among the people. The searches did not go unnoticed. Lanterns weaving through the cedar breaks, the scrape of shovels, the quiet rustle of footsteps in forbidden places. All of it carried into the ears of neighbors who watched from darkened windows, unsure whether to intervene or simply let the hills decide what justice looked like. the Boggs place, long marked by uncertainty, became the center of a shared tension, one that pulled the community into a subtle but undeniable divide. And it was during these uneasy years that legal matters began to drift into the story, shaping the legend into something far more complicated than whispered treasure hunts in the night. The law in the Ozarks, especially in earlier times, was more of a suggestion than a force. Sheriffs served large counties. Deputies patrolled long distances with limited resources. Many disputes were settled between families or left alone entirely. But trespassing, particularly when done repeatedly and with the clear aim of unearthing something that did not belong to the diggers, could not be ignored forever. When the first property transfers involving the old Boggs land began to appear in courthouse records, they brought new eyes, new opinions, and new tempers to the ridge. The new owners, unfamiliar with the old ghosts and not swayed by the reverence locals held toward the story, were less tolerant of wandering searchers. They posted signs. They spoke firmly in town. They even lodged a complaint after finding a pit dug near the oak cluster behind the barn, a pit deep enough to twist an ankle, wide enough to suggest someone had worked at it for hours. The complaint fizzled, as many did in those days, but its filing marked a shift. For the first time, the treasure legend intersected with official record, pulling the tale out of the fog of rumor and anchoring it, if only faintly, in the ink of legal documentation. And where legal matters begin, community divides often follow. Some residents sympathized with the new landowners, insisting that the Boggs place was private property, not a playground for hopeful men with shovels. Others argued that the land held something more significant than paper deeds could contain, a piece of community history, a secret tied to the old family, something that should be uncovered for everyone, not just those who held the title to the soil. In small towns, disagreements rarely remain quiet. They seep into church pews, drift into general store conversations, appear at fence lines where neighbors share news while leaning on worn boards. One Sunday morning, after a sermon about honesty and stewardship, two men were overheard debating near the hitching post. One insisted that the new owners were within their rights to chase off treasure hunters. "Land is land," he said. "If a man owns it, that's the end of it." The other man shook his head slowly. "Maybe so," he replied, "but if the truth's in the ground, it belongs to more than one person." That exchange, quiet and measured as it was, captured the essence of the growing divide: property versus history, ownership versus memory, deed versus legend. Complicating matters further were old family stories, tales passed down among neighbors who had lived beside the Boggs clan for decades. These stories spoke of disagreements between the Boggs family and their closest neighbors, of disputed boundaries and shared springs, of arguments over livestock or timber rights. One account tells of an older Boggs man and a neighbor nearly coming to blows over a matter so trivial no one could recall the details years later. Another version speaks of a falling out between the Boggs family and a distant relative who moved away under mysterious circumstances. Whether these recollections were accurate or warped by time hardly mattered. People believed them, and belief shaped how they interpreted the treasure tale. For those who harbored old grudges or remembered past tensions, the idea of the Boggs family hiding something valuable felt almost like vindication, a secret kept from the community, perhaps even from kin. The legal side of the story grew further muddled when rumors began to circulate about wills, documents long lost or destroyed, that might have mentioned money or property held in trust. Some older residents swore they had seen a folded letter years ago in which a Boggs patriarch wrote cryptically about ensuring the security of our holdings. No one could produce the letter, of course, and no copy existed in courthouse archives. Yet the idea of a missing will fed the growing belief that the Boggs family had been preparing for something, hiding something, and that the courts, for all their authority, could not pierce the veil of secrecy the family had maintained. If the community was divided before, these lingering legal murmurs drove the wedge deeper. On one side were those who argued that the Boggs family, flawed or not, deserved their privacy, even in memory. They believed the treasure story, if it held any truth at all, was a burden the family had carried silently, a burden best left undisturbed. On the other side stood those who believed the land itself was crying out for answers, that the hills did not swallow secrets without reason, and that the community had a right to uncover what had been hidden. And so, the discussions continued, sometimes polite, sometimes heated, often unresolved, while the land remained silent, offering no clarity. Then came the stories of strange lights in the woods. These lights were seen by people on both sides of the debate. They appeared on moonless nights, dancing faintly between the trees, moving with a deliberation that made them impossible to mistake for fireflies or lantern reflections. Witnesses described them as soft glows, bluish, pale white, or faint gold, hovering low to the ground or drifting along the ravine. A few insisted the lights appeared only when someone spoke openly of the treasure. Others believed they were the spirits of the Boggs family, guarding whatever had been left behind. A more practical neighbor suggested the lights were nothing more than foxfire or swamp gas, but those who had seen them firsthand disagreed. One woman said, "I know what foxfire looks like. This was different. This moved like something with purpose." The lights deepened the mystery, widened the divide, and fueled the belief that something on that land resisted discovery. Even the new property owners, initially skeptical, were unsettled by accounts of glowing shapes weaving through their trees. They reinforced their fences. They kept oil lamps burning late. But the lights continued, appearing unpredictably, flickering in and out of existence as though mocking those who sought explanations. Tension grew so palpable that some families avoided the Boggs Road entirely. Others took the long way around the ridge, unwilling to pass by a place where land and legal disputes, memory and rumor, folklore and suspense mingled too closely for comfort. And yet, there were those who found the story irresistible, who felt drawn to the land precisely because it stirred such emotion. They stood at the fence line, staring into the dark woods, wondering whether they were witnessing the beginning of truth or the slow unraveling of a legend. Today, the legal disputes have faded. Title chains are clean, boundaries settled, property lines stable. But the divide left behind persists, not in courts or deeds, but in memory. Some still believe the treasure belongs to history, not to the landowner. Others argue that the hills gave the Boggs family a secret and that the hills intend to keep it. And sometimes, even now, when night settles deep and the air grows sharp, a faint light moves through the cedars. It drifts for a few moments, hovers near the ravine, then disappears into the dark as quietly as it came. Whether it is foxfire, imagination, or something older, no one can say for certain, but it remains a doorway, an open image leading us deeper into the story, toward those who carried these memories longest and whose voices still echo through the hollows. When that pale, wandering light slips back into the cedars and leaves the ridge swallowed by darkness once more, the story does not end. It merely shifts its weight and settles deeper into the people who have lived closest to it. For long after the first searchers laid down their shovels, after the new property owners posted their stern warnings, and after the courts filed their thin stacks of complaints, the memory of the Boggs treasure lived on most faithfully in the voices of those who survived into old age. The elders of the Ozarks have always been the keepers of what the land refuses to say aloud. Their recollections, shaped by decades of watching seasons turn and families rise and fall, hold more texture than any record, more breath than any newspaper clipping. And as the years rolled forward, it was the old-timers who ensured that the Boggs story would never fade completely from the hollows. These elders spoke differently from the young. Their words had a way of drifting like smoke, curling around details that seemed unimportant until you listened a second time. They remembered the Boggs family not as a mystery or a legend, but as real people who walked the same ridges, hauled water from the same springs, and worked the same stubborn fields. They remembered how the Boggs boys laughed when they were small, how the father held himself with a stiff pride that seemed to come from hard lessons learned early in life, how the mother had a way of watching the road whenever a stranger passed by. To them, the family was neither villain nor victim, but something more complicated. People caught in the heavy grip of circumstance, making choices that echoed long after they were gone. One old-timer, long since passed, said he remembered the Boggs patriarch as a man who carried sorrow in his shoulders. He walked like the world bore down on him, the old man said, like he knew something none of us wanted to know. When he spoke these words, his voice softened and his eyes lowered to the ground, as though that remembered sorrow had weight even after half a century. Another elder described the missing Boggs son as quiet but not unfriendly, a young man who could work a plow straight as a rail and who always stopped to help neighbors mend fences after storms. It pained her to think that such a person would vanish without a trace. Her voice trembled when she said, "There was goodness in him. I know there was." These remembrances did not erase the darker suspicions woven through the tale, but they added depth, complexity, and humanity. They reminded people that legends grow because they simplify what was once far too tangled to comprehend. They also reminded listeners that fear and misunderstanding can transform ordinary lives into whispered stories told beside wood stoves. And as these old voices shared their memories, they also shared the quiet questions that had haunted them for decades. Why did the Boggs family withdraw from the world so suddenly? What had frightened them, or driven them, or burdened them so heavily? And why, after all this time, did the story still clutch at the imagination with such insistence? The elders did not always agree on details, but they agreed on something deeper, that the story had changed over time, drifting like the lights in the cedars, gathering bits of imagination as it moved from generation to generation. Some swore the talk of 40,000 in gold was an exaggeration, perhaps a misunderstanding of smaller sums that grew in the retelling. Others believed the number was accurate and that the family had indeed handled more wealth than any of their neighbors realized. Still others suspected that the treasure itself might never have existed at all, that the whole tale had grown from the disappearance, from the silence that followed, from the way the land seemed restless near the ravine. Sometimes, one woman said, a mystery grows because people need it to grow. It fills a space in them that truth won't touch. Yet even among those who doubted the treasure, there were elders who insisted they had seen something, signs, moments, glimpses that convinced them there was more to the story than ordinary caution or grief. One man recalled finding a rusted lock in a creek bed near the Boggs place shortly after the family left the area. The lock was old, heavy, and shaped in a way he had never seen before. It bore no maker's mark and had a strange, almost foreign style to it. "It was too fine to belong to folks like us," he said. "Too fine for anyone around here, truth be told." He kept it for years wrapped in cloth inside a drawer, certain it had once belonged to the Boggs chest whispered about in early rumors. Whether his assumption was true or not did not matter. The lock became a symbol, a tangible fragment of the intangible tale. Another elder spoke of a winter morning when she and her sister, as girls, walked past the ravine on their way to gather fallen limbs for kindling. They saw what they believed was the imprint of a boot heel in a place where no recent tracks should have been. Snow had fallen lightly overnight, and the print looked fresh, sharp around the edges, the tread clear and unmistakable. Yet it was the only print, no trail leading to it, none leading away. "As if someone took one step and vanished," the elder recalled, her eyes clouding with the memory. That single footprint etched itself permanently in her mind. It did not prove treasure existed, but it made the land feel haunted in its own quiet, patient way. For every story rooted in tangible memory, there were others woven from the softer threads of intuition and belief. Some old-timers claimed the Boggs land felt heavy, as though the ground carried worry deep beneath its surface. Others said that whenever they passed the property at dusk, the hair on their arms lifted and a chill moved across their necks regardless of the season. One man claimed he once heard whispering near the ravine, soft, indistinct, the kind of murmur that makes a person question whether the sound comes from the world or from the mind. None of these experiences produced evidence, but evidence matters less than feeling in a place where land, memory, and superstition live side by side. The elders also remembered how the story grew legs, how children whispered it in schoolyards, how teenagers dared one another to approach the Boggs gate at night, how adults spoke of it only when the wind pressed hard against their windows. Some recalled nights when a thunderstorm rolled across the ridge and lightning illuminated the ravine in stark flashes. In those moments, they swore the ground looked disturbed, as if mounded up in places where it should have lain smooth. But lightning reveals only what it wants to reveal, and the human mind shapes those brief, startling glimpses into meaning long after the sky grows calm again. And so, the story endured, shaped by voices now long gone. The elders did not keep it alive for entertainment or mischief. They spoke because the story belonged to the land as much as to the people. They spoke because the memory of the Boggs family held something unresolved, something that refused to sink fully beneath the soil. They spoke because the story had become part of what it meant to live in these hills. If you stand in the hollow now, listening to the creek move over its stones, you might imagine those old voices carried in the wind. Their questions linger there, blended into the moss and the cedar scent, waiting for someone new to wonder. And as a breeze lifts through the trees and rustles a rusted lock lying half buried in the creek bed, the legend seems to shift again, preparing to slip from memory into full folklore. When a story crosses that quiet threshold from memory into folklore, it changes in ways that feel almost organic, as though the hills themselves reach out and reshape its edges. The tale no longer belongs to one family or one generation, or even to those who lived close enough to witness its earliest echoes. Instead, it becomes part of the broader landscape, carried on the breath of wind slipping through the cedars, carried in the murmur of springs as they trickle across limestone shelves. That is what happened with the Boggs treasure. The raw memories of those who lived alongside the family softened over time, settling into the rhythm of the Ozarks, and from that slow merging arose a new life for the legend, one marked not by facts, but by symbols, images, and the quiet power of stories told and retold across decades. This is the stage when folklore takes root. It began subtly. A story recalled by a grandmother became a tale framed with a touch more mystery when shared by her daughter, and that daughter's own children added flourishes that felt appropriate, whether true or not. A memory of hearing digging at night became, 2 generations later, a claim that the earth itself groaned beneath the strokes of a shovel. A fleeting glimpse of a lantern behind the cedars grew into the notion that spectral lights patrolled the ravine, guarding whatever the family had hidden. Slowly, piece by piece, the hard lines of truth blurred into softer shapes, and those shapes took on a strange life of their own. Some told of phantom riders who passed along the ridge late at night, their horses' hooves making no sound on the rocky path. They were said to be searching for the treasure, cursed to wander until they reclaimed what belonged to them. The older folks dismissed this as nonsense, but the younger ones, especially those who walked the road after dusk, could not help glancing over their shoulders when the wind grew restless. Others said the ground near the ravine sometimes trembled lightly, not with the force of an earthquake, but with the subtle throb of something buried deep. A few claimed that, on certain nights, the frogs and crickets fell silent in unison, as if the earth were listening for the faint chime of metal beneath its skin. Some stories ventured into darker territory. A handful of families in the region recounted a belief, whispered but never spoken loud in daylight, that the Boggs family had not only hidden gold, but had invoked something supernatural to guard it. They spoke of an old Appalachian notion, carried west by settlers, that treasure buried with a secret death becomes cursed. According to this belief, a spirit, either of the one who dies or of the one who buries, remains bound to the place, compelled to protect the treasure or ensure it is never unearthed. Whether the Boggs story fit this mold or not was unclear, but the idea found fertile ground in the imaginations of those who lived near the ravine. When an owl cried late at night or a fox barked sharply in the dark, people found themselves listening with uneasy attention, wondering whether such sounds signaled more than they seemed. Folklore also filled the gaps in ways truth never could. Where the real history lacked clarity, stories stepped in and stitched together motives, emotions, and meaning. Some said the missing Boggs son returned as a ghost, wandering the property, searching for the very thing he had hidden. They described seeing a thin figure near the ravine, tall, quiet, moving with a slowness that suggested he was not bound entirely by the world of the living. These sightings were always fleeting, always at the corner of one's vision, always attributed later to tricks of moonlight or imagination. But the tales persisted. They blended with the shape of the land, with the way branches cast long shadows across the ground, with the eerie hush that sometimes falls just before dawn. As these ghostly elements took hold, others followed. People began to say the treasure could never be found unless approached with a clean conscience. A man weighed down by greed would be misled by the land, hearing hollow sounds where solid ground lay and striking rock where something hidden truly rested. This moral tint, common in Ozark folklore, gave the legend a kind of quiet justice. It was not enough to want the treasure. One had to be worthy of it. Worthiness, of course, is a slippery thing, and more than one seeker walked away feeling the land itself had judged them lacking. Children, always the first to turn fear into play, created their own variations. They dared one another to touch the old oak near the ravine at dusk. They whispered that if you placed your ear against the trunk, you might hear faint metallic clinks, like coins shifting deep beneath the soil. Some said that if you spoke the name of the missing Boggs son into the hollow of the ravine, the wind would return your voice in a whisper that was not your own. These childhood inventions, though never meant to be taken seriously, found their way into the broader fabric of the legend, because in the Ozarks, even a child's story can grow roots if it fits the shape of the land. Folklore also influenced the way people interpreted ordinary, natural occurrences. A patch of wildflowers blooming out of season near the Boggs place became a sign that the treasure lay beneath. A sudden gust of wind bending the cedar branches inward was said to be a warning to leave the area. The chirping of crickets falling silent was taken as a sign of a restless spirit nearby. These interpretations were not universal, but they were frequent enough that they began to reshape the way people approached the land itself. Even those who did not believe in spirits found themselves stepping carefully near the ravine, wary of disturbing something they could not explain. And then there were the stories of animals behaving strangely. Hunters swore their dogs refused to cross a certain point near the Boggs property, tail tucked, ears laid back, growling at nothing visible. Others said deer skirted the ravine in a wide arc, avoiding a patch of ground that no one could see, but that the animals sensed instinctively. Livestock that grazed nearby were sometimes found restless at dawn, spooked by an unseen presence. For many, these accounts were far more convincing than tales of ghosts or lights. Animals, after all, have senses that humans lack, an ability to detect shifts in the environment that escape human attention. Their unease gave the folklore a foundation in instinct, something harder to dismiss. Among the most persistent stories was the idea that the treasure itself exerted a kind of pull on those who lived nearby. Men who had no intention of searching would find themselves waking in the night, thinking of the Boggs land, imagining themselves standing at the edge of the ravine with a shovel in hand. Women whose families had no connection to the Boggs clan would dream of coins spilling out onto bare earth, the metallic scent heavy in the air. These dreams, though likely born from the simple influence of local chatter, were treated with a gravity rare among legends. They suggested that the story did not merely rest in the land, it reached out. By the time the story reached the stage of full folklore, it had taken on a shape that no amount of truth-seeking could fully unravel. It had become a braided story, part fact, part memory, part imagination, part fear. It was the kind of tale that lingered in the back of the mind when walking home under a moonless sky. The kind of story that caused travelers to pause before entering the hollow. The kind that made even practical men quicken their pace when passing the old Boggs fence line. And as the folklore deepened, it left behind a low, distant rumble. A sound like thunder rolling across the ridge, though no storm had gathered. It was the land itself shifting, preparing for the next chapter, when old tales would collide with new seekers and modern curiosity. The hills, after all, have long memories, and thunder often comes before something stirs. When thunder rolls across a clear sky in the Ozarks, folks tend to stop what they're doing and listen. It is not a common thing, and not a thing easily dismissed. A sound like that carries the weight of memory, like the land is shifting in its sleep or clearing its throat to speak. That was the atmosphere that greeted the dawn of the modern era of the Boggs treasure story, a time when curiosity took on new forms and new tools, when the old whispers collided with fresh determination. The legend was no longer just something spoken beside kitchen tables or murmured at church steps. It began to mingle with the imaginations of people far beyond the original hollow. And with that mingling came a renewed wave of seekers, each armed not with shovels wrapped in burlap, but with technology, research, and the stubborn belief that modern minds might succeed, where generations before had failed. The 20th century brought with it a wave of progress that changed the hills in ways both subtle and profound. Roads improved, electricity reached remote hollows, and families who had lived in the same cabins for decades found themselves surrounded by machines that hummed and glowed. But even as the world changed, the old stories remained. They clung to the ridges like mist, drifting into conversations whenever someone mentioned a patch of odd ground or a strange noise in the woods. And as technology advanced, so too did the tools used by those determined to find the treasure. Metal detectors, once crude and unreliable, grew more precise. Ground-penetrating devices appeared in specialty catalogs. Satellite imagery slipped into amateur hands. The legend, once rooted in lantern light and whispered suspicion, now beckoned with the promise that science might finally separate truth from imagination. Local newspapers began to take an interest. Articles appeared with cautious headlines. Local legend draws hobbyist interest. Searchers probe old Boggs land, each framing the story with a mixture of skepticism and quiet fascination. Reporters interviewed elderly residents who recounted the old tales, and though many of their details contradicted one another, the contradictions only deepened the allure. One such article described a small group of metal-detecting enthusiasts from Springfield who obtained permission from the current landowner to sweep the outer edges of the property. They spent weekends combing through the cedar breaks, their detectors emitting sharp beeps that punctuated the otherwise still air. They found musket balls, horseshoe fragments, an old clasp from a tool chest, and a rusted hinge that may or may not have belonged to a Boggs-era strongbox. None of it proved anything, but each artifact, no matter how ordinary, felt like a stepping stone, a hint that the land still held pieces of its unnamed story. Another modern seeker, a retired schoolteacher with a passion for regional history, spent years collecting every document even remotely connected to the Boggs family. He traveled across county lines, visiting courthouses, scanning brittle pages, requesting copies of forgotten land patents. His research led him to old maps that hinted at paths long since reclaimed by brush, and he convinced himself that one of those forgotten footpaths once served as a route for transporting gold. He wrote an article for a regional magazine suggesting that the treasure might have been moved multiple times, buried in stages, each relocation a reaction to fear. Though his theories were rooted more in intuition than proof, they sparked renewed interest among readers, many of whom had never heard the Boggs name before. This new wave of curiosity also brought in outsiders, people drawn not by personal connection, but by the allure of a mystery left unsolved. Cars from neighboring states began to appear along the narrow county road that ran near the Boggs property. Some visitors came simply to walk the area, their eyes scanning the ground with a mix of reverence and anticipation. Others arrived with small equipment, hoping to detect metal signatures beneath the soil. A few attempted secret searches, slipping onto the land without permission, only to be turned away by watchful neighbors who believed the hills had already endured enough trespassers. The intrusion irritated some locals who felt the privacy of their quiet valley was being disrupted by strangers chasing shadows. Yet others saw the renewed attention as a kind of validation, proof that the legend was more than a family tale lost to time. One of the most enduring modern stories comes from a man who spent decades searching for treasure across the Ozarks. Not just the Boggs treasure, but Civil War caches, outlaw stashes, and hidden payrolls rumored to have vanished into the hills. He approached the Boggs story with skepticism at first, noting the lack of solid evidence. But after speaking with several elderly residents and reviewing what few documents remained, he found himself drawn in. One autumn, as the oaks turned gold and the air grew cool, he spent 3 weekends sweeping the ridge with his metal detector. He claimed that near the ravine, his detector emitted a deep, steady tone, unlike any he had heard in years. Not the sharp chirp of surface metal, not the quick ping of small objects, but a resonant, weighty hum that suggested something large, something buried deep. He dug a test hole but found only hard earth and stone. Still, he insisted the signature was real, that something down there was interfering with his equipment. "I can't say it's gold," he admitted, "but I can say the land is holding something, and it doesn't want to let it go." That phrase, "the land doesn't want to let it go," echoed the old folklore in a surprising way. Modern tools had not stripped the legend of its strangeness. They had amplified it. For every new device brought to the ridge, something seemed to push back. Batteries drained unexpectedly. Equipment malfunctioned in small, inexplicable ways. Detectors that worked flawlessly elsewhere suddenly fell silent. Of course, technology falters for ordinary reasons: soil composition, geological interference, operator error. But in the Ozarks, such disruptions carry a different kind of weight. They make people wonder whether the land itself is choosing what to reveal and what to conceal. Archaeologists, too, cast their eyes toward the Boggs land, though none conducted official excavations. A few made informal assessments, studying the topography, noting where human activity seemed most likely to have occurred. One archaeologist suggested that the ravine's shape indicated long-term erosion that could have easily hidden or scattered artifacts over decades. Another noted that the soil layers near the barn showed signs of repeated disturbance, though whether from animals, farming, or intentional digging was impossible to determine. Their conclusions were cautious, measured, and far from sensational. Yet even their careful assessments lent the story a new legitimacy. Not all modern interest focused on physical searches. Genealogists began tracing the Boggs family line, uncovering marriages, migrations, and distant relatives scattered across the country. Some descendants expressed surprise to learn of the legend. Others said they had heard fragments from their grandparents, but dismissed the stories as fanciful lore. A handful insisted the treasure never existed and urged people to let the family's memory rest. Still, others were open to the possibility that something valuable, maybe not gold, but something meaningful, had been hidden during desperate times. Their varied voices added new layers to the mystery rather than resolving it. Through all of this modern activity, one truth emerged quietly but unmistakably. The treasure legend had become more than a hunt for gold. It had become a mirror reflecting the way people relate to mystery. Some sought answers to satisfy curiosity. Others searched because the hills seemed to whisper for someone to try. A few looked simply because the story had woven itself into the identity of the region, becoming part of what it meant to walk the ridges and listen to the wind move through the cedars. And so, the legend persisted, renewed by modern tools, reshaped by new generations, grounded by old memories. The thunder that had rolled without clouds was not a warning, but a signal, an indication that the next chapter would require more than searching the soil. It would demand something deeper, a reckoning between what is true, what is believed, and what the land is willing to reveal. And as that faint metallic beep of a detector lingers in the air, we step forward into the realm where truth and legend confront one another directly, where we ask not what is buried, but why the story refuses to die. That faint metallic beep, long drawn out, wavering, almost reluctant, hangs in the cool air like a question that has waited far too long for an answer. And yet, as modern ears listen for certainty in the soil, the deeper truth begins to emerge. The Boggs treasure story has never been a simple matter of lost gold or misplaced wealth. It is a crossroads where fact and folklore stand shoulder to shoulder, where memory blurs into narrative, and narrative takes on a kind of reality all its own. To understand the heart of the legend, one must step carefully into that uncertain space between what can be proven and what can only be felt. This is where the story becomes most fragile, most human, and most deeply tied to the spirit of the Ozarks. Truth, in these hills, is not always a straight path. It twists like a creek that changes course after every hard rain. Old records give us glimpses of the Boggs family, land deeds, tax entries, the occasional reference in church rosters or local announcements, but they do not speak of gold or hidden wealth. The ledgers show modest means, nothing to suggest anyone in the family possessed a fortune, let alone one as considerable as $40,000. And yet, these same records hint at activity that feels larger than the numbers would suggest. A sudden withdrawal, a brief spike in land value, a quiet settling of an unsettled account. Details small in isolation but compelling when viewed together through the long lens of rumor. Newspapers of the era offer equally slender clues. References to robberies, missing travelers, and unusual disturbances in outlying areas paint a picture of a turbulent time. But the Boggs name rarely appears. When it does, the mentions are ordinary. A man attending court for routine matters. A family noted for improvements on their farm. No bold headlines, no accusations. Nothing that fits the drama needed to support tales of hidden treasure. But history rarely tells its deepest truths in black ink. Sometimes the story lives between the lines in what people chose not to write down. On the other side of the equation lies the world of legend, the sprawling, imaginative territory shaped by fear, longing, and hope. Folklore tells us the Boggs treasure was gold coin, heavy and glinting. Or it was paper money wrapped in oilcloth. Or it was a payroll shipment never delivered. Or it was inheritance from a shadowy relative. The details change with the teller. And yet, the stories agree on two things. The family had something valuable, and that something vanished when one of the Boggs men disappeared. Folklore is rarely unanimous, but here it stands surprisingly aligned, pointing in the same direction. But does alignment imply truth? Or does it simply reveal the human tendency to repeat the version of the story that feels most complete? When weighing truth against legend, one must also consider the pressures of the time. The post-war Ozarks were hungry years. Families hid money anywhere they could, under floorboards and stovepipes, inside tree hollows, beneath the hearthstones. Banks were few and often mistrusted. Theft was common. Many households kept their earnings secret even from close kin. In that climate, a family behaving cautiously would not be unusual. Secrets were a kind of currency, protection against danger. Some historians argue the Boggs family fell into this pattern, hiding modest savings that later bloomed into myth when the disappearance occurred. They propose a simpler explanation. The treasure never existed. Instead, it was the dramatic circumstances, the absence of a son, the cryptic behavior of the family, the strange noises heard by neighbors that ignited imaginations and allowed a story to grow from ordinary roots. Under this view, the treasure became a vessel for collective unease, a symbol that helped people articulate fears they could not otherwise voice. But this interpretation, sensible as it sounds, struggles against the weight of consistent local memory. Too many unrelated people, across too many decades, recalled odd occurrences at the Boggs place. Late-night digging, strange visitors, guarded behavior, rushed decisions, the hurried movement of heavy chests or bags. Memory can distort, yes, but patterns that span generations often deserve a closer look. Truth versus legend analysis must also address motive. If the Boggs family hid treasure, why? Were they afraid of thieves, protecting something for someone else? Or were they concealing money that had no rightful owner? The darker theories imply wrongdoing, stolen payroll, robbery gone awry. But no record exists linking the family to crime. Good reputation mattered in these hills, and the Boggs name, while surrounded by caution, was never linked to violence or theft. Then there is the matter of disappearance. No official record documents a death. No burial was mentioned. No obituary. That absence alone fuels speculation. People tend to believe that when a man vanishes without explanation, something extraordinary must have occurred. But the Ozarks of that era were full of disappearances. Illness, accidents, migration westward, enlistment in late militias, or simply leaving behind a hard life for the hope of something better. People left without sending word. People died without witnesses. People were buried quickly, privately, without church ceremonies. The land swallowed many more than those later remembered in legend. Still, the Boggs disappearance felt different to the community. It felt sudden, secretive, weighted. And feelings, in folklore, often hold more power than facts. To balance the scales further, consider the archaeological assessments. Soil disturbance was documented near the ravine, as noted by modern observers. But disturbed earth can result from many causes: root upheaval, animal dens, erosion after storms. Nothing found conclusively indicates buried treasure. A few metal finds, a hinge, a clasp, may be relics of life on the homestead rather than evidence of wealth. Yet one must also acknowledge that time and nature erase much. Wooden chests rot, cloth disintegrates, metal corrodes. A buried cache could disintegrate entirely without leaving enough trace to satisfy science. And so, truth and legend continue their quiet tug-of-war. At this stage, the legend has accumulated so much emotional gravity that even irrefutable proof, one way or the other, might not dispel it. If someone found a single gold coin tomorrow, believers would claim it as validation. Skeptics would call it planted or unrelated. If the land were excavated thoroughly and no treasure found, believers would insist the Boggs family moved it again or hid it elsewhere. In this way, the story resists closure. It has become self-sustaining, fueled not only by memory but by the longing for a mystery that holds the hills in a kind of suspended question. And perhaps that longing says more about us, the listeners, the seekers, the descendants, than about the Boggs family themselves. Perhaps we need such stories to remind us that the land still holds shadows we cannot illuminate, that history contains corners we may never explore fully, that not every truth must be brought into the open light. Tonight, as the imagined echo of that detector beep fades into a soft hush, We find ourselves closing the ledger, separating what can be proven from what must simply be accepted. But as the book shuts, a thin cloud of dust billows upward, a reminder that even closed documents leave traces drifting through the air. And if you tilt your head just right, you can almost hear the whisper of that dust settling, a quiet invitation to step deeper into the cultural imprint left behind by the Boggs treasure, an imprint that shaped generations long after the family vanished from the ridge. When dust rises from an old ledger and slowly drifts back down, it reminds us that stories, like the land itself, leave traces long after the people who shaped them are gone. Those fine particles settle into every crevice, becoming part of whatever surface they touch, and in much the same way, the Boggs treasure stories settled deep into the cultural soil of the Ozarks. It became something more than a mystery to be solved. It became a mirror reflecting the values, fears, and quiet longings of the community. Even as generations passed, the legend exerted its subtle pull. It shaped how people spoke about the past, how they viewed the land, how they understood the possibilities hidden beneath everyday life. The tale did not merely linger, it embedded itself. The cultural imprint began with the families who lived closest to the Boggs property. For them, the story was not an abstract curiosity, but a presence woven into their routines. Some avoided the ravine entirely, teaching their children to steer clear of the unstable ground and the uneasy feeling that clung to it. Others felt a small thrill in walking the ridge, imagining they could sense the currents of old secrets flowing beneath the soil. These attitudes shaped the way children grew up, coloring their sense of place. A simple walk to fetch water could become a moment of whispered caution. A quiet evening on the porch might carry an undercurrent of speculation as fireflies blinked across the yard. Even families who dismissed the treasure entirely still felt the weight of the story because it hung in the air around them. As the tale spread, it reached beyond the immediate neighbors. Nearby towns folded it into their local identity. A few small shops in the mid-20th century displayed hand-painted signs referring to treasure country. Some of the older general stores kept a dusty corner shelf dedicated to what locals jokingly called the Boggs collection. A few rusted objects found near the ridge, each tagged with a scrap of cardboard describing where it had been discovered. Most of these items were mundane: bits of wire, a fragment of a tool, a small wedge of iron that might have been part of a stove hinge. Yet they carried the aura of the story, and people treated them with a gentle reverence, as if each piece held a speck of truth about the old mystery. Community events occasionally drew upon the legend as well. During festival season, storytellers gathered near bonfires to recount the region's folklore, and the Boggs treasure always earned a place among the tales. Its telling varied from speaker to speaker. Some framed it as a tragedy, emphasizing the disappearance and the unspoken sorrow that enveloped the family. Others leaned into the suspense, describing the lantern lights, the strange sounds, the unsettled earth. A few infused the tale with humor, teasing listeners about the number of treasure hunters who had left empty-handed. But even in lighthearted retellings, an undercurrent of solemnity remained. The story was larger than entertainment. It was part of the land's memory. The legend also influenced the way people interpreted their physical surroundings. A depression in the soil, a mound that looked too even, a series of naturally aligned stones. These features were rarely dismissed outright. People wondered whether they had touched a fragment of the old story. They paused and examined the ground more closely. They shared their observations with neighbors. Even when nothing came of it, the act of noticing became a kind of ritual, a way of engaging with the land that felt older than the community itself. The hills encouraged such attention. The Ozarks reward those who observe carefully, who read the ridges like maps and listen to the trees as if they speak. And when a legend takes root in such a place, it heightens that instinctive attunement. Beyond the local culture, the Boggs treasure story caught the interest of writers, folklorists, and historians studying the Ozarks. Articles appeared in regional publications exploring its themes: the nature of hidden wealth, the role of silence in rural communities, the blending of fact and myth. Some scholars argued that the story served as a metaphor for the uncertainties that shaped life in the post-war years, a time when communities were rebuilding trust and family fortunes could collapse overnight. Others viewed it through the lens of American treasure lore, a category that includes lost mines, outlaw stashes, and frontier secrets. Within this broader context, the Boggs tale stood out for its quietness. No gunfights, no dramatic heists, no flamboyant characters. Just a family, a disappearance, and a silence that became louder with time. This subtlety only deepened its cultural resonance. Listeners felt they were brushing against something real, something that happened to ordinary people whose names might once have appeared beside their own in church records or school attendance lists. This sense of nearness made the legend personal. It caused people to look inward, to reflect on the hidden parts of their own family history. Stories half told, secrets buried in old letters or unmarked graves. In this way, the Boggs treasure became more than a single mystery. It became a framework through which people examined the quiet depths of their own past. The cultural influence extended too to land values and property lore. Some parcels near the original homestead acquired a peculiar reputation, neither entirely positive nor negative. The allure of potential treasure made certain buyers curious, while the eerie associations deterred others. Realtors in the mid-20th century sometimes found themselves answering questions about that Boggs place, even when dealing with properties miles away. A few enterprising souls attempted to market land as being in the treasure region, though such efforts were met with mixed reactions. For some, the legend was a selling point. For others, it was a reminder of unresolved sorrow. Farmers and old-timers also drew comparisons between the Boggs treasure and other regional mysteries. Stories of Confederate gold hidden in caves, rumored caches left behind by bandits, or money buried by families who never returned home formed a backdrop against which the Boggs tale sat like a quiet, persistent companion. These parallels enriched the cultural tapestry, placing the story in a lineage of Ozark enigmas that hinted at the region's long, tumultuous history. Yet the Boggs legend remained distinct in its intimacy. It was not a story of war spoils or outlaw daring. It was a story of a family's guarded heart. Perhaps most importantly, the legend shaped the way the community understood silence. The Boggs family's refusal to speak openly about what happened created a model, one that reflected the broader Ozark tendency to hold difficult truths close to the chest. Many families in the hills carried their own quiet struggles, and the Boggs story seemed to echo that shared experience. Listeners sensed that the legend was not only about treasure, but about the burden of secrets, about the cost of guarding something too tightly, about the way silence can ripple outward across generations. Over time, this sense of shared understanding allowed the story to soften. The community stopped framing the Boggs family as mysterious or suspicious and began viewing them more as symbols of a universal truth. Every family has its hidden corners, its chapters written in ink that fades. The treasure, whether real or imagined, became secondary to the empathy woven through the tale. And yet, the imprint of the story remained unmistakable. People continued to approach the ridge with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. Newcomers asked about the legend, and old residents shared it with the same slow cadence their grandparents used. It was no longer merely a local mystery. It was a cultural inheritance. Toward the end of this long evolution, the trail leading into the woods became more than a path. It became an invitation into a shared memory, a gentle, moss-lined walkway into the heart of the Ozarks' relationship with the unknown. And as that trail disappears into the thick trees ahead, we follow it deeper into the last living connections, those whose personal ties to the old families keep the embers of the story glowing. The trail narrows as it sinks into the trees, the canopy thickening overhead until sunlight breaks through, only in scattered shards. The air here feels different, denser, touched with the faint scent of cedar oil and damp leaves, as though the woods know they are carrying the weight of old stories. And somewhere beyond the curve of the path lie the last living connections to the Boggs family, the elders and descendants and quiet keepers of memory who still hold threads of the treasure legend in their hands. They are fewer now, their voices softer with age, their recollections frayed at the edges. Yet it is through them that the story breathes its final human warmth before settling once and for all into the realm of history and folklore. Meeting these descendants, whether directly related by blood or connected through marriage, friendship, or proximity, is like stepping into a space where time folds back on itself. They speak in the slow, reflective rhythm of people who have spent their lives listening to the land. Some still live not far from where the Boggs homestead once stood. Others moved away long ago, but carry with them the memories handed down at kitchen tables, stitched into family conversations like patches on an old quilt. They are not storytellers in the theatrical sense. They are caretakers of what remains, little details, inherited opinions, half-remembered warnings, small truths that cling to the edges of the larger story. One such caretaker is a woman in her late 70s, known in her community for her sharp mind and her devotion to the history of the Ridge. She remembers being a child and hearing her grandfather speak of the Boggs family with a mixture of respect and sorrow. According to him, the Boggs men were hard-working, decent people who carried burdens they never shared. She recalls her grandfather pausing at the same point in the trail every time they walked past the ravine. He would point toward the cedar grove and say, "Nothing back there ever did grow quite right." She asked him why, and he would only shake his head. "Some things stick to the land," he would say, "even when folks disappear." She never knew whether he believed in the treasure, but she knew he believed in the weight of silence. Another living connection, a man in his 80s with a voice like gravel and a laugh that echoes off the hills, remembers a story passed down from his mother. She claimed that when she was young, she saw one of the remaining Boggs women standing alone at the edge of the barn, staring toward the ravine as if expecting someone to return. She did this often, sometimes for hours, still as a fence post, her face unreadable. "She wasn't looking for treasure," the old man says. "She was looking for something lost. Might have been a person, might have been peace. Hard to say." He pauses before adding, "Loss does something to a family, makes them quiet, makes folks talk." His words hang in the air like pine smoke, gently drifting before dissolving. Not all descendants carry stories tinged with sorrow. Some speak of the Boggs name with a sense of quiet pride, even if their branch of the family tree split off generations before the story took shape. One woman, living in a nearby county, said her father always joked that the treasure must have been meant for them and that someday the land would give it back. It was a light-hearted family tradition, she explained, the kind of thing that elicited smiles around the dinner table but carried no real expectation. Yet she also admitted that whenever she passed the old homestead on rare visits to distant relatives, she felt an odd shiver of recognition, as though the ground itself knew her steps. "My father would say that's the land calling out to its own," she said with a warm chuckle. "But maybe it's just old stories doing what they do, lingering." There are also those who want no part of the legend. One middle-aged descendant, uncomfortable with the attention the story has brought, insists the treasure never existed and that the family was simply unlucky, caught in a tangle of misfortune and rumor. "People will invent anything if they don't understand what happened," he says. "Truth gets buried deeper than gold ever could." He speaks with conviction, yet there is a flicker in his eyes, a flicker suggesting that some part of him, however small, still wonders what his ancestors carried in silence. Even the adamant skeptics cannot fully untangle themselves from the gravity of the tale. Local historians, those who have spent decades piecing together the region's genealogies, offer perspectives shaped by both research and intuition. One such historian, a soft-spoken man with stacks of handwritten notes covering his kitchen table, has studied the Boggs lineage for nearly 40 years. He can trace marriages, migrations, and land transfers back to the early 19th century. He has tracked rumors across county lines and examined what few fragments of the family still exist in archival records. And yet, when asked whether he believes the treasure was real, he responds not with evidence, but with a quiet sigh. "I don't know," he says, "but I know the story mattered. It mattered to the people who lived here, and sometimes that's more important than whether a box of gold ever sat in the ground." He explains that the legend became a vessel for emotions the community struggled to articulate: fear, loss, resilience, the ache of not knowing. The Boggs family lost someone, he says, maybe more than one. That kind of hurt leaves an imprint. People feel it, even if they don't know the details. The treasure became the shape they gave that feeling. As these last living connections share their memories, one begins to understand how the story stayed alive so long. It did not survive because people were greedy or gullible. It survived because people cared, because they sensed something unfinished in the old homestead, something unresolved that reached across generations. It survived because the hills themselves seemed to hold their breath when the story was told, as though honoring a deep, old sorrow. In conversations with these elders, it becomes clear that the Boggs treasure is less a tale of wealth and more a meditation on the human heart, on the secrets families keep, on the distances that can grow between loved ones, on the quiet ache of unanswered questions. The treasure, whether real or not, became a way for people to explore those emotions without naming them directly. And now, as twilight settles over the ridge and the air cools, these last voices grow softer. The descendants stand at the edge of memory, guardians of the final human threads, connecting past to present. They look out over the old Boggs land, now just hills and trees and fading fences, and feel something they cannot fully describe. Maybe it is pride, maybe sorrow, maybe the simple weight of carrying a story that refused to die. The light fades, the woods deepen in color, and a hush spreads across the hollow, the kind of hush that comes right before night lays its full weight on the land. The ridge grows still, as if preparing for the final turn in the tale, where the treasure story, soaked in memory and shadow, gives way to something quieter, something thoughtful, something that lingers long after the last word is spoken. And as the last slant of twilight slips behind the hills, settling into the roots of the cedars, the path ahead darkens, inviting us into the reflective quiet of the final chapter. Night settles slowly over the Ozarks, slipping into the hollows with a quiet certainty, as though the hills themselves are drawing in a long breath before resting. The twilight that lingered at the edge of the ridge melts into full darkness, and the familiar shapes of cedar and oak become silhouettes etched against a deepening sky. It is in this softened darkness, this gentle folding of day into night, that the Boggs treasure story feels most alive. The land grows still, the wind lowers its voice, and the distances between past and present narrow in a way that makes the mind wander. This is the hour when the story breathes its final note, not with answers or revelations, but with a kind of thoughtful stillness that asks us to listen closely to the land, to the silence, and to the spaces where truth no longer matters as much as the lingering question itself. By now, we have walked through every shade of the tale, the documented hints, the trembling rumors, the voices of old-timers, the rise of folklore, and the attempts of modern seekers to solve a mystery shaped more by shadow than fact. Yet when we arrive here, at the edge of the story, something becomes clear. The treasure, whether buried in the soil or born of human imagination, was never the heart of the legend at all. The heart lies in the quiet places between the details, the moments when neighbors paused mid-sentence, when a lantern flickered behind the cedar line, when a child pressed their ear against an old oak and thought they heard a whisper. These moments hold more truth than any ledger entry ever could, because they speak not of gold, but of the human longing to understand what lies beneath the surface of things. As night deepens, the hills remind us that some stories endure precisely because they are incomplete. The Boggs family carried their silence with a weight that no historian can measure. Their disappearance, their caution, their strange behaviors, each left marks on the community that were never fully explained. And perhaps that lack of explanation is what gave the story its long life. People do not gather around tales that offer every answer. They gather around mysteries that echo, stories that leave room for wonder, legends that match the quiet expanses of the land itself. If the treasure ever existed, it has long since woven itself into the soil, scattered by weather, buried deeper by floods, broken apart by the slow persistence of time. Gold, after all, is only metal, and metal does not stand a chance against the patient strength of the Ozarks. Stones shift, earth moves, roots spread. A century can bury anything beyond reach, but the real treasure of the story, the part that has survived, is the way it shaped the people who carried it. The legend brought neighbors together around potbelly stoves. It traveled across porches, through family lines, along ridge trails, into the hands of storytellers who felt the weight of their ancestors' voices. It inspired caution, curiosity, awe, fear, and an odd sense of kinship. For in the Ozarks, where life has always been intertwined with land and memory, a story like this becomes a shared inheritance. And what then do we make of the lights that people claim to see drifting through the woods, or the footprints in the snow that ended abruptly at the ravine, or the hollow sounds beneath the soil that set treasure hunters' hearts racing in the moonlight? Facts may dismiss these as imagination, coincidence, misinterpretation, but the truth inside folklore is not measured by proof. It is measured by persistence. These details linger because they fit the rhythms of a land that is itself mysterious. The Ozarks have always held pockets of strangeness, quiet corners where time folds, where echoes travel in unexpected ways, where the ordinary brushes against something older and deeper. The Boggs story simply slipped into one of those pockets and made a home there. Now, as the last of the twilight's color drains from the sky, the woods feel ancient and awake. The air cools. The first stars emerge, and the ridge seems to listen, as though aware that this is the moment when the tale softens into reflection. We stand here looking out over the darkened hollow, picturing the Boggs homestead as it once was. The cabin, the barn, the smoke rising steady from the chimney, the paths worn smooth by the footsteps of men who carried more than they ever said aloud. We picture the family at their kitchen table, their faces lit by lamplight, their thoughts heavy with decisions we will never fully understand. And we picture the missing one, the son, the brother, whose absence became the turning point in a story that might otherwise have slipped quietly into obscurity. There is a sorrow in that image, but also a strange peace. Life in these hills has always been shaped by both. Families lose and endure, build and rebuild, keep moving through seasons that test their resolve. The Boggs family in all their silence were no different from the countless others who lived and struggled here. Their story only lasted because something about it felt unfinished, because humans are drawn to loose ends the way the night is drawn to the hollow. As the hour grows later, the darkness settles fully around the ravine, and the land becomes a single quiet shape beneath the stars. In that darkness, the treasure feels less like a physical object and more like a metaphor, something buried not in the earth, but in the collective imagination of the Ozarks. Perhaps it represents the desire for fortune in a land that demanded hard work. Perhaps it symbolizes the secrets families carry. Perhaps it stands for the idea that the past never truly leaves, that it hides just beneath the surface, waiting to be brushed by the curious hand of a new generation. And yet the land, patient as ever, refuses to clarify. The hills give nothing away. They hold their mysteries close, allowing only glimpses. A rustle of leaves where none should be, a flicker of light across the ridge, a feeling in the air that something unseen is near. These moments remind us that the treasure story is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be lived with. In the end, as we stand in the quiet heart of the hollow, surrounded by trees that have witnessed more years than we can fathom, we are left with a single thought. Perhaps the true value lies not in gold, but in the spaces the mystery has carved out in our minds. Spaces where curiosity lives, where questions linger, where stories echo long after their tellers are gone. The night deepens, the woods settle. A soft breeze moves through the branches like a sigh from the land itself. And in that gentle breath, the story takes its leave, not resolved, not closed, just quietly fading back into the hills, where it belongs.